Hello. Good evening.
All right, Dan, we're good to go.
Think so.
All right. I'll get us started. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City of Maitland Planning and Zoning Workshop for Thursday, September the 3rd. As a result of the COVID-19 outbreak and resulting social distancing and prohibitions on large group meetings, and out of abundance of caution, we're having this meeting electronically through online video communications. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, through Executive Order 20-69, allowed for online government meetings. Participants do not need to be physically present as long as sunshine law requirements are met. Members of the Planning and Zoning Commission and other city staff are present via online video through smartphone, tablet, or computer. Residents and stakeholders can watch the meeting live on YouTube via a link provided by the city website. So with that said, we'll go ahead and start the Thursday, September 3rd, 2020 Planning and Zoning Commissioning Workshop and call it to order. We have a roll call.
Yeah, absolutely. Chairman Holloway,
Here.
Vice Chair Bennett,
Present.
Commissioner Jaffe,
Here, present.
Commissioner McIver,
Here.
Commissioner Lamb.
Here.
That's everybody.
All right. So for approval of the minutes, we have a couple of sets of minutes to approve. Today, I think that's based because we had an edit for the first one from August 6th to 2020. So we'll move on this one first. Does anyone have any comments regarding the August 6th minutes? If no comments, can we have a motion?
So moved.
Get a second?
I second.
All right.
And do a vote?
Sure. Commissioner Jaffe,
Agreed, yes.
Commissioner Lamb,
Aye.
Commissioner McIver,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bennett,
Aye.
and Chairman Holloway.
Aye. So the second set of minutes that we have are for the workshop from August 20th, 2020. Do we have any comments on those minutes? If no comments, can we have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Let's have a vote.
All right. Commissioner Jaffe,
Aye.
Commissioner Lamb,
Aye.
Commissioner McIver,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bennett,
Aye.
Chairman Holloway.
Aye. All right, before we get started on the workshop, Dan, I understand you have a little presentation or some info for us.
Well, it's not a fancy presentation by any means. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is that post-COVID, there's a lot of changes in the industry, in the restaurant association. And one of the things that we've been asked a lot and are considering doing is writing up an ordinance for what we'll refer to as a specialty takeout establishment. And what that is it's basically an establishment that you can pre-order food, prepay it on a website or on an app, and they'll let you know when it's ready. You can go and you can park, and they'll text you when it's ready, or you set a specific time and you pull it to the window and pick up, or a door, and pick up your food. Also popular with things like Grubhub and things like that, services like that. What we're seeing post-COVID and in research through the Florida Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association is this is kind of the model for the future. And some jurisdictions are already on board and writing that into their ordinance. And we'd like to do the same. We'd like to give that option. What it differs from a drive-through restaurant in the fact that you don't have your typical menu order board, your speaker system. You don't have stacking because you're texted when your food is ready. You pull right up, get it, and pull off. They would also allow for limited dining. And what we would do is, if this is something that P&Z is interested in moving forward, we would probably get an ordinance put together within the next month and get it to you ahead of the rest of the code, as we are hearing demand for this in different parts of the city. So we would write something, and it basically would allow for customer pickup, bypass lanes. It would have things like that, certain locational criteria. It would allow for one service lane, but a second one could be done if you had like a secondary pickup window for your delivery services like DoorDash or Grubhub, or if you had a lot of orders and the restaurant or establishment said, your order is going to be ready at window 1 or window 2, but it would have to be a separate system. But we would write that into the ordinance and get something to propose to you if that is something you're interested in doing. You would also have its own criteria as far as signs. It wouldn't allow to have signs. It would just have a single canopy over the area where food is being delivered. You wouldn't have like the menu board sign or anything like that. You may have a sign that says, express pickup lane only type stuff. So this is some of the things we're thinking about. Again, it's the direction that the industry is going post-COVID. Even when we get back to a new norm, we're already seeing this with restaurants like Chipotle, Tijuana Flats, and a lot of restaurants that traditionally weren't drive-through are now offering this specialty dining type atmosphere. And so what we'd like to do, and actually Barrett and I went and visited one today in the area. It was a Tijuana Flats where they've done basically the same thing up in the Castleberry Fern Park area. So if it's of interest to P&Z, we will put together a draft ordinance and bring it to you guys to massage it or provide feedback and make a recommendation to council at one point. Is that something that P&Z is interested in moving forward at this time?
Let me ask a couple of questions, because I was reading through a couple of definitions in the use category. So the definitions we have in like restaurants, takeout and delivery, restaurants sit down, they have drive-through service may be allowed as an accessory use. Are you saying this is different than that definition?
Correct. This is different because in those instances, drive-throughs typically have what you consider a drive-through restaurant. You have your menu board, you have your speaker system where you're calling out your order. You generally have stacking lanes because you have people backed up waiting for the order to be prepared. Either ordering on site, waiting for it to be prepared on site while they're stacking in a stacking lane. In the downtown Maitland, we don't allow drive-through at all. And there is a demand for this. So how this differs is it doesn't have that menu box. You don't order and wait for your food to be made. You actually pre-order, you prepay, you can park on site and get a park in like you have dine-in parking for those that want to eat in a limited dine-in, or you can have like the pre-order waiting, and the restaurant will either text you and say it's ready to be picked up, where you just pull through and pick it up and pull out. But there is no stacking because you don't have people ordering here and then waiting and waiting while their food's getting made. And so it separates it in that way. And what we did is we called it a specialty takeout establishment. We have a draft definition for it, but of course this is very early on, and we'll be massaging it, and obviously hopefully you guys will be massaging it as well if you choose to move this forward.
So do we need to treat this like a motion, or how do we address this one, Dan?
So if it's something that you're interested in moving forward, then all we need is just P&Z to say, yeah, bring us something to look at. You're not committing to approving anything. You're not committing to denying anything. You're just saying, yeah, we'd be interested in this ordinance moving forward so we can consider it.
I mean, my comments initially are that it's a glorified drive-through lane, just minus the speaker box, and it doesn't belong in a downtown. It conflicts with pedestrians. I absolutely get sometimes what businesses need to survive. Takeout's part of it, or Uber Eats has to be received, but the difference between a drive-through lane versus a pickup spot, to me, are very, very different, and I think it's a dangerous, slippery slope.
Okay.
I concur. I don't know how you can, I mean, how can you, I mean, well, just one of my comments. I don't know how you stop queuing.
Well, the idea you stop queuing is that the food is already pre-ordered and prepaid. So you're given a text saying,
Yeah,
swing
but
that window too, and it's ready right there.
but how many restaurants? I mean, I've gone to a lot of restaurants here recently where food's pre-ordered, prepaid, and they go in and you still got, 4 or 5 people. Again, not in an external situation like this, but they go to wait inside the store. Now that would be waiting in a car in a queue of 3 or 4 cars long. I mean, I think it's a slippery slope. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in seeing something for consideration.
Okay.
Agreed.
And it's, it's something to consider because there's article after article after article national saying this is the model.
But how is this different than like what Luke's did for a while, or even, I mean, Luke's had that little side door over there when they weren't open, but they were still accepting, app orders and web orders, and I stood there in a couple of car lines a couple of times getting an order. Is this different?
The only difference, I mean, this differs a little bit from curbside takeout in the fact that someone's running to your car to give you the food versus you're pulling up and someone's giving it to you and you're pulling away. So that's how it differs. Otherwise, we allow curbside pickup.
Say that again, Dan?
What's that?
Can you say that again? Because I don't know that I understood the difference.
So curbside pickup, you pull up to a curb and you park and somebody walks out and hands you the food. This you pull up to the door or window and they hand it.
You pull up right to the side. Oh, I got you.
Right. So the curbside pickup is not new. It is permitted everywhere. We've got it in almost all of our restaurants. This would just allow for another option because we're seeing this trend nationally, and a lot of restaurants are scaling down the size of the inside dining and offering more options like this.
But like Antonio's has some parking spaces that we'll often pull into and run inside. And for the downtown, in the spirit of our downtown, which involves a vision of 50 years or 100 years down the road, I would be real concerned that it's a modern day drive-through lane, because the only thing missing is the box. But whoever thought we would have been ordering food off our phones the way we do now, and minus the call-ins, the speaker, doesn't it have really similar qualities?
It has some similar qualities, yes. The intent of it is that you don't have near the queuing, everything is pre-done and pre-ordered and prepaid. So there's not stopping at one window or stopping in a box, ordering, yelling through a speaker, stopping at the next window, paying, and then stopping at the next window and getting your food. If the concept is something that you're okay with, just not in the downtown area, we can restrict it in different areas we're not necessarily saying if we write this, it's blanket throughout the city. We're just saying, is this something that you would consider in all or parts of the city?
And personally, I feel better about what you just said, parts of the city, but if I thought you were referring to downtown, that to me would be where I think could be problematic.
But we have had some interest in some downtown and some outside of downtown.
Yeah, I think the queuing thing is the biggest. As much as you can say it's controlled, things get out of rhythm. It happens all the time. Things start stacking. I think that's the big fear factor here. I can't remember where I was at, but one of the Chick-fil-A's, I mean, some of these restaurants have got out of hand with the drive-through. I mean, they literally had the police out there because they had people, out with walkie-talkies bringing through the drive-through, and it was literally creating a traffic issue with some of this. So I think we need to protect ourselves a little bit, not to get those types situations. But so I think if we see something, those are the big questions.
Is it something you'd be interested for us to draft some language and bring it back, or do you not want to see it at all?
I think to Glenn's point, I don't think that's what the vision would be for like downtown, but could it work somewhere else in the city? And I forget, and I apologize, who said it. I guess it was you, Glenn, when you were talking about how you're ordering food off of your phone and paying for it off of your phone, and you're just picking it up. So, I mean, could that work in other parts of the city that would be acceptable, that we would look at and say, that's, again, if we're looking at a bigger picture, this is part of the future of what we have morphed into. Does it make sense to look at something like this? I'm not opposed to looking at it, but I mean, if you look on page 4-64, that's your drive-through facility. And to your point, Matt and Glenn, if you read the drive-through facility definition and you look at what the specialty takeout dining establishment is, it's very, very similar. So I think we have to, could it work in, say, like, some of the commercial areas in the, over Maitland West, the Maitland Business Park, something like that? Is that something to consider?
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying. Is there may be a place for a time and a place for it. And we need to think about that time and place where we think it should go.
Mhm.
So I'm not opposed to looking at some language like what you just had on the screen. That's one of those things I'd like to study and then see where it would be most appropriate, what makes sense in the city as far as locations to use that in.
Okay.
Agreed. And 4-64 was impressive reference.
Very thorough review.
So it sounds like, Dan, we're cautiously saying yes.
Okay. And if you're interested, I mean, we'll be happy to send you some of these articles that are going around CNN and Restaurant Association and stuff, kind of showing different ways of doing it. And I think their kind of argument is there's not a whole lot of difference if you pre-order and you just go and you sit in your car and either somebody runs it out or you run right in and pick it up versus not having to get out of your car and just keep going. But I get the concern that it's very similar to a drive-through, and it is. There's no doubt that it's very similar to a drive-through. I don't want to. I want to make sure that if this is kind of the post-COVID way the restaurant association, a lot of them are moving, I want to be ahead of the curve and not playing catch up.
Dan, what is your take? Like when you're referencing this and you're bringing it up, give us an example. Where do you think this is fitting and how it's different than our, what we on 4-64 become very cautious of drive-throughs?
The 4-64 speaks specifically to a speaker box and noise and all that stuff. So it differs from that respect. I mean, the intent is that you're not ordering and sitting and waiting for your food to cook and then going to the next window and then going to the next window. It's intended that you've already ordered, you've already paid. And again, Barrett and I did that today. We went to the one in Castleberry, pre-ordered our food online, told them exactly what time we were going to be there. We pulled up at that time. They had their food ready for us. There was virtually a 30-second wait, maybe at the most. And we pulled out. There's no money exchange. There's no giving change back. It's just, what's your name? Here's your order. Have a nice day.
What kind of restaurant?
This was Tijuana Flats that we went to today.
Yeah.
And that's already a drive-through, right? Isn't that already a drive-through?
Like places like Chipotle, they have nationally, that's going to be their model moving forward with the Chipotle lane is what they call it. You're seeing it with some of the other restaurants that have multi-lane, some dedicated just to the delivery services like Grubhub, some multi-lane that you can just, they'll tell you like a bank teller, pull up to lane 3 and that's where you pick up your food type thing. So there's a variety of ways we can write it. I think we're just in the past 3 weeks, we've had at least 2 people asking for it in the city. So there is a demand. There is, but again, it's up to you guys and to recommend and council to approve or not where it is or isn't appropriate. I think there may be some areas in downtown that it's not as bad as others. If it's within a tucked in shopping center, maybe, or something like that, maybe a standalone one right on 1792 is probably not as appropriate as something that's tucked into a shopping center, or maybe using a refurbished bank or something like that as converting that into this concept. So I think there may be ways where we can write the use specific standards to alleviate some of those concerns or locate them where everybody deems is appropriate and not.
Dan, do you see businesses retrofitting like their existing structures for this, or would it be more new construction?
The ones that we've seen so far, well, around the country, they started out, a lot of them retrofitting, but I think you're seeing some newer designs coming out that are actually really impressive designs that have to be new builds because they're quite impressive. But the Tijuana Flats we went to today was a refurbished something. I'm not sure what it was. It was a refurbished fast food. I've seen some examples of some banks that have refurbished the teller lanes to become pickup areas. So there's a way we can do it, and we could. Now, if there's something we're interested in, now is the time to write the standards of what we do or don't want to see.
I agree.
I always feel like we should be building our buildings for downtown and not to the business. And so would we allow a bank with drive-through lanes? However you want to define the drive-through lane, would we encourage a bank? And again, I'm getting hung up on almost Independence Lane and what I'm imagining is downtown versus what you just said, 1792, and some areas where maybe we don't care as much.
Yeah, right now, currently, the downtown Maitland does not allow for drive-throughs. And that's drive-throughs, whether it's a drive-through restaurant, whether it's a drive-through bank, drive-through ATM. It even defines that drive-through as in a dry cleaning service where you drive through and pick up your clothes. That's not permitted in downtown right now. So if we were to allow it in downtown, this would kind of separate it from a drive-through restaurant. We'd have to call it its own, whether we call it specialty drive. I don't remember what we called it, but especially takeout dining or whatever, but you would have to be, and we can even write standards that in order to do this, X% has to be dine-in also, or, so it more makes the takeout side at least 50% or ancillary or whatever that makes it fit into the character of the area better. And that's something that if we do move this forward, we'll have time to massage the language and make sure we get it right before sending it to council.
Glenn, think of it this way. You could put sub sandwiches through the drive-through bank teller things.
Man,
You
I don't
go
need any subs.
with a couple of cans of Coke.
No burritos, please. They get messy going through those tubes.
I've installed those pneumatic tubes before. I think
The
it's
chute
fine.
through the air chute, yeah.
As long, well, never mind. I'll shut up. So if that's something you guys are interested in, we'll draft something for you to consider. And obviously we'll massage it and put a lot of time and effort into what we collectively, P&Z, is or is not acceptable in what locations and in what ways it would be acceptable.
Okay. When do you anticipate we would see this language?
We would have to draft something up. It would probably be a month maybe, because it would be an advertised meeting, so we'd have to go through an advertisement and all that. With a formal recommendation would be an advertisement. So it's not going to be anytime really soon, probably within a month or so. We've got some other cases that are going to be coming to you within a month or two as well.
So so if you draft the language up, when is the place and time that the decisions are made where we think this is reasonable for the city of Maitland? Is that coming as part of what we're doing now?
Well, if we did it within the next month or so, you P&Z forwarded on to council and council approved it, we'd like to get it done sooner than later. If we wait for the whole code, we're talking May of next year. And like I said, we've had already 2 requests for this in the past 3 weeks or so. So I think I don't want to wait until May if that's something that the city is interested in entertaining.
But in terms of revising the code to say what zones it would be allowed in, that would coincide with it, right, Dan?
Yeah, we would just write the ordinance now and incorporate that into the overall.
So yeah, you'd be writing a section and then amending different zone districts to allow it.
Yeah, and that was my question is, so we would be seeing in a month from now is just the language. And at another point in time, we would make determination on where that's feasible.
Well, we would have to give you language when you see it, where it would be appropriate or where you recommend it's appropriate, because the zones now are different from the zones hopefully in May 2021. So we'd make that conversion as we go through module 1 and 2 completion. But we would at least give it some temporary existing zoning districts if it gets adopted, obviously in the next few months or so.
And to Keith's point, that would happen at the same time. That's part of the ordinance.
Right.
Okay.
So question, how do you say it has to be 50% dine-in and so much takeout, or whatever the numbers are, what you're seeing as an industry standard, as far as what is being projected with these types of takeout dining. How do you, if you say, okay, in the city of Maitland, we want 50% dine-in and you can do another 50% with the takeout. How do you enforce that?
It's what you would have to do is set really like a minimum square footage of indoor dining. And just, you can't force people to go indoors and eat, but the purpose of having a minimum indoor dining would be to lessen the impact of a drive pickup and make it more of a restaurant, with that being one of the options. I think, and when I forward you these stories and these articles, you're going to see that a lot of restaurants, even the ones that have never done drive-through before, are kind of going to this model, because this post-COVID has really scared a lot of the industry, and they're more trying to move towards more pickup and delivery, or curbside pickup or delivery, and less interior dining and even more outdoor dining spaces, because this COVID has really made people want to separate people, be more outdoors or more in their car, and not congregate them in an enclosed restaurant. And I think we're going to see that trend continue regardless of COVID goes away completely and things get, start going towards the normal. But I think this is going to be the new normal. Every indication I'm seeing, following trends in the industry, this is what we're seeing.
So are you seeing that this is even, right now we're dealing with some extreme cases, but even a restaurant that has a traditional tabletop service, is that what you're hearing? All of those are trying to set up for some backup plan like this?
I to a degree, yes. Now, not every restaurant's doing that, but I have really good friends that own restaurants, and through COVID, when everything became takeout only, you're seeing that they're now converting a lot of their restaurants to expand a pickup takeout area and lessening the indoor dining, or trying to petition the cities or whatever it may be to allow more outdoor parking, utilizing some of the parking spots as outdoor dining. And you even see all that with Houndstooth across the street. Houndstooth during COVID went all to takeout and catering, and they were making more money doing that than their restaurant was operating. And so they're starting to do a lot more of that, really promoting curbside pickup, things like that. So I think you're going to see that trend continue for a while, regardless of how COVID comes and goes and whatever. I think this really scared a lot of people and a lot of restaurateurs.
So my other question is who regulates whether alcohol can be takeout along with that service?
So the Alcohol Commission regulates that. The state will regulate that. And for instance, where my friends own a lot of restaurants in Texas, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission during COVID said you could take out batched alcohol, batched margarita kits, things like that. That goes away when they declare that you can't do that anymore. If that is something that you want to see in this ordinance, we can say no alcohol sales can be a part of this. And I think that's good. We don't necessarily want to be promoting picking up. Well, I know you can't pick up an open container and drive with it, so it would have to be a pre-sold. I think even the one we went to today said you could buy a bottle of wine through the takeout window. So it's really, we're in the infant stage of starting to draft any kind of language. So this is good conversation that I intend, if we do bring it forward, that we'll continue this conversation to help shape something that we're all proud of in sending to council.
So unless anybody disagrees, it sounds like we're saying, yeah, we'd like to look at it, but we definitely want to make sure we're looking at where this is going to be.
Okay.
Everybody agree with that?
Yes.
I see a bunch of head nods.
Mine too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we will work on something. It probably won't be in front of you for a month or so because we got to put a lot of thought into it and try to get something that you guys will be proud of, or at least we'll be able to massage easier and not have to start from scratch.
So along that topic, Dan, a lot of our current restaurants and things, like you said, they've been doing these unique things to survive and respond. I mean, are those, and they're probably, they sort of veil under emergency situations, but technically by our city codes, are they able to do some of the things they're doing, or are we just looking the other way? And I guess that's a question. Do we need to have some kind of provision for temporary situations?
So that's an excellent question. So with the governor's order, it did allow for some relaxation on some of that stuff. What you will see, and I don't recall if it's in module 1 or module 2. So module 2, there's some language in there that's proposing, in the case of a declared emergency, that the city has the right to relax certain regulations. Specifically in a case like this, if another pandemic breaks out, then we can relax some of the regulations and allow more outdoor dining or things like that. It gives us the flexibility to handle emergency temporary situations, not permanently, but
Specifically when it comes to uses, different zones allowing temporary uses where in some zones where it wouldn't be otherwise, or some of the development standards, modifying those as it makes sense to handle exactly the kind of things you're talking about.
and if any of you have ever studied evolution, this is what they call punctuated equilibrium. When something drastic happens that makes an evolution of something happen a lot quicker than normal. In this case, COVID has changed the restaurant industry to a degree, and some drastic changes have evolved so they could survive and not all fold. And I think that's something that's going to carry forward into the future. I don't think it's going away. The demand is definitely not. Certain places like Chipotle has said this is the only model they're going to be building now. Some other restaurants have in interviews and articles said this is how we're going as well. So it's a matter of we want to be a part of it or not.
Yeah, I think one of the things on the like some of these temporary situations, I've seen at least one instance where outside dining has bled into, some of the parking spaces and things, and why I don't have a problem with that. I concern a little bit about the safety aspect, because now we've got dining setting in, right off of circulation that was never intended. And again, it's just I think those are the things we need to think about as we relax those things, is make sure that our population's, protected by those when we do those temporary things.
The flip side to that also is that I know Stanford Brewery, they would have music and people would buy their growlers and then walk across the street to sit in the park, still be able to listen to music, but have gone to the restaurant and bar, to support them. And it's worked out great. And those are the kinds of things you hope would continue with that park being redeveloped.
I think we're going to see, and not just a restaurant, but I think we're going to see this, what we refer to as BC and AC, before COVID, after COVID. I think we're going to see some changes in multiple different industries based on what this has done.
Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll get something to you probably in the next month or so. We don't have any specific dates or timelines. We still gotta put our heads together and draft something, but with that, we got direction from you and we'll start the rest of the code.
Well, actually, before we get into the rest of the code, I did want to have a quick conversation about email. Last time and time before, we had known that we had been having problems receiving and sending emails. So after the last meeting, we did a little experiment or test and sent emails to everybody's work emails and personal emails, and heard back from almost everybody. But so I just want to have a conversation with everybody to make sure that we can have reliable electronic communication. From what the city's perspective, what we're doing is trying to make it more convenient to reset your passwords. If you lose your password, you get locked out. Unfortunately, right now, you do need to, our policy and is that you need to come in person. Every single one of you, I think, had that experience of coming up to the third floor and getting your password changed. We're working on getting that so that due to the pandemic and everything else, to make it so it doesn't have to be in person, and trying to balance some of the security concerns with convenience and health concerns. So that's happening on our end. Due to our kind of test and experiment, I know Glenn and Matt, you do currently have access to your city emails accounts.
Mhm.
And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I guess I just want to ask for the rest of you where you are with, is it just a matter of resetting the password, or are there other technological obstacles to using the city's email account, like access to cell phones or whatever it is, whatever the case may be, so that we can get everybody just using the city emails?
I have always had problems from day one accessing it, my city account. And the only way I get anything is unfortunately through my personal account, which I know that's not the way it's supposed to be, but I cannot get in there.
Right. Okay.
I think mine's just a reset of the password, Barrett.
Okay, but because at a certain point, it required a change, and you just couldn't get in there and make that change.
Yeah, I think we tried to do it a couple of times, and I think the last meeting we tried it, there were two people ahead of me, and we couldn't fit it in before the meeting started. So
I see.
I
Okay.
think that was the issue. It's been a while, but I can definitely we can arrange something to come up there and see if I can get it reset.
Sure, and we might have a way that we can reset it remotely, which is what we're hoping to do. So we're making progress on that, working on there. And how about you, Commissioner Bennett?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yes, I have access to mine.
Oh, okay, great.
I
Okay,
apologize.
so we'll work, because I think our goal is just to, we kind of have the 1 foot in the personal and 1 foot in the city email. Our goal is to get all in the city email. So so Commissioner MacGyver and Chair Holloway, we will work with you individually to both restore access and make sure you guys have it easy for you guys to do, to get into. And that'll we'll work on that between now and the next meeting. If that's all right with you. That sounds good. That's all I have on the email topic. So thanks for that conversation.
All right, with that, I guess we can start back up the review of the land development code. So per our notes, we just finished 3-56, I believe it was. Yes, 3-56, we were going over signage. So we are on 3-57.
Just as one quick housekeeping note, if it's okay with everybody, I'll try to, shoot for 8:30 check-in. Certainly see how much progress we get then. And is there anybody that has any overall comments about the review process or this document before we get started? We can ready to pick up on the stores. Okay, thanks. Anybody have any comments?
Sorry, I did. I had a question.
Sure.
And I know Matt and I were the last, we were kind of the last, well, Glenn actually you unseated us, but we were the last ones in. So in reading through this and trying to understand, did the consultants did they do any studies of, what is the predicted population of Maitland? What is the demographics of the residents? Who are we designing this for?
Well, yes, they didn't do those studies, but a lot of that study went into the comprehensive plan. So if we remember this code, land development code, is based on the foundation of the 2035 comprehensive plan update. So the consultants did look at that very carefully, and the data inventory analysis that went into that. So this is trying to implement kind of the vision set out in that comprehensive plan.
Okay, is that something that's available to us?
Yeah, absolutely.
So see, that was before our time on P&Z, so I don't know or have access to that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely get you an electronic copy. I will put it in the FTP website that you should all have received a link to, and I'll drop that in there, first thing tomorrow.
Okay, because I'm just trying to, when you start to think about just what we were talking about, the specialty takeout, what is the predicted future? So what is the predicted population, the demographics of who we think will be living here, that kind of thing? Because I just think that's who are we trying to design this for?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good comment. And as Barrett said, that inventory analysis did a 20+ year projection of our population, our demographics, the makeup of the city, and all that. And so what this does is it's implementing the vision that the comp plan set out, as well as really just modernizing our code. Our code is a 30-year Band-Aid after Band-Aid, and it's very outdated, very old policies, old planning practices that in some cases have worked for Maitland for a while, some cases they have not at all. So what this is doing is really bringing us into a modern code that provides the protections for the residents while taking into consideration the demographics of that data inventory analysis. The consultants also, when they came here, this was before you got on P&Z, Kathleen, but they spent a few days here interviewing the P&Z members, interviewing council members, interviewing staff, some stakeholders. They took tours of the city. They got a good feel of what the city was all about. And they've written codes throughout Florida, so they're not unfamiliar with this area. So that was all taken into consideration with this.
Okay, because so again, because of what I do, I've been reading a lot of articles about, urban cores and what is the rebound going to look like for some of these downtown areas, whether it's downtown Orlando, downtown Tampa, with all these, what's going to happen to the Class A office space. And then you kind of look at how are they going to be sustainable in the future and what's going to happen to that space. So that's why I was, again, just thinking this through. Who is our customer and how do we want to help them in the future? And that's just why I was asking about this, the population and what you're seeing.
That's a good question.
One of the things that is the objective of this code is to make it more flexible and adaptive to respond. One of the things they looked at in the analysis is that we've been really relying on plan developments because variances were difficult to get. And so every little project became a long, arduous plan development. So our code is trying to be more nimble, more flexible to allow for adaptive reuse and to allow some more staff level flexibility for determinations of use and determinations of development standards.
That's actually a very good, you bring up a really good point, Kathleen, that the idea of this code is to provide that flexibility. COVID has changed the way we operate. I don't know if you follow the stock market, but Zoom stock is higher than Google. Or not Google, but some of the really high performing stocks. Nobody would have predicted at pre-COVID the amount of people that are now teleworking, that offices are closing, and what are we going to do with those buildings? What are we going to do with those Class A's? Some offices some of the offices organically are going to come back. Some of them are going to say, you know what, we kind of like this working from home stuff. We kind of like having overhead. So the code provides that flexibility in case of market trend changes or things that change the shape of how the economy works. Online shopping is really big now. A lot of your retail space is turning into personal services that you can't buy online, like nails and hair and restaurants and things like that. So the intent of this code is to be flexible enough to change in an evolving marketplace that, quite honestly, we don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to go in the future.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been looking at from as a design firm, it's really with and I like your term, Dan, the punctuated, was that punctuated evolution?
Punctuated equilibrium.
Equilibrium.
Evolutionary term of, instead of a really slow evolution, some certain instances happen that makes a very quick change that then becomes the adaptive new norm.
The external shock sometimes. Right?
Because it is, and we've been looking at this. It's like you almost have to go back to the reasons why. If you're designing buildings, it's going back to the basic, asking, why you're doing it, or what draws people to the city of Maitland. Because after this, the answer may be different. There may be different reasons, and so I think that's part of when we start looking at who we are. It's just asking those basic questions.
I think in some ways a sense of place is even going to become more important if it's not necessarily where people have to go to work. It's for office, the quality of life factors and having a walkable outdoor area, place to live is going to be more important if people are not going to be having to physically report to work every time.
Having cool neighbors like all of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I would never, it's not my goal to be a commuter. So I just would not put myself in a situation where I have a long-term commute. So that priority for me has gotten different now. The future could be different on that. So it's not about a distance to an office anymore, potentially.
Right. Yeah, it's about high quality, spaces and places.
But I still like being near a cool downtown place like Maitland.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely.
We like you being close too.
All right. So any comments, any more general comments before we start? All right, page 3-57. Again, just from a graphic statement, and I made this on some others, maybe just have them do some tests and maybe a little bit darker tone. I like the light. It just maybe just needs to be a hair darker. So just maybe they do some tests.
Would a painting on a window, would that be considered a window sign?
A painting?
I don't think so. I think in another portion of the code where they do talk about what materials you can use. And I don't think paint was one. If you're imagining like a drawing of an animal or something like
It has to be a high quality professional thing. It can't be like shoe polish
yeah,
written on the window.
I'm 95% certain that's accounted for in our elsewhere in the code.
So in the bottom of paragraph 5, it says gold leaf, professional painting, and decals are permitted materials, right? But
Oh,
like, what about like what Starbucks does when they paint, like, you know, get your new fall latte or whatever on that?
that professional
I think
painting.
my painting is definitely not professional, so mine wouldn't work. But I think if it's a professional, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We can deep dive deeper either into the definition of professional painting or take away that as a sign.
Yeah, it's tough to make that call, and it'll ultimately.
Yeah,
be
and it's an enforcement thing too, right? I mean, I get it. It just, some of that stuff can be kind of tacky. I think we're trying to avoid that, but we're almost kind of here permitting it. And I don't know. It just was one of those questions that I had, was just wanted to kind of raise it up.
Yeah, that makes sense. And quite honestly, I could see someone like Outpost, who is a very artsy place. I could see them painting on their windows. So yeah, we want to either decide if we want it or not, and if so, how do we define it?
Anything else on 3-57? How about 3-58?
Can you explain the active allowed uses terminology again? It shows up in a couple, and I thought I remember we had this discussion when we reviewed the downtown component, but I went back to my notes and I couldn't find anything. Like an item under parking garage, item C.
Yeah. Um,
I thought we had a discussion, but I just can't recall what that defined.
as opposed to passive open space, I think they're talking about things that are going to be in Article 4, like your principal or accessory uses. Is that that's what you're thinking, Dan? In terms of, I think it means like retail, office services.
Yeah, that's the way I read it, is that if you can have a parking garage and the bottom floor can be some non-residential uses. You can use it as an office, you can use it as a retail spot. So if MCC was just a parking garage and the first floor had some retail and restaurants, I think that's kind of what they're referring to here.
Yeah, like up at C, where I've highlighted here.
Okay, so that is what it's called. Okay, I got it.
Other
Okay.
than parking,
Residences.
I think that's distinct from like a passive use, which is like, you can't say, I've got like a patio. It's not.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
How about page 3-59?
It seems to me when I read item C under the stormwater design, I wonder if there's a way to more efficiently incorporate that into item A on the previous page. Because it says the preferred method should be regional stormwater facilities in lieu of accommodating stormwater on site. But then it says all stormwater management areas should be incorporated into the overall design of the project. it kind of seems like you could change the language and say, you know, take the end of that Article A and say accommodating stormwater on site and should be incorporated into the overall design of the project.
Definitely. The way we've talked about this on staff is that it's kind of a hierarchy if it's not really explicit. You know, A is like our best case scenario is it's just connect to the regional stormwater pond. If you can't do that, do the underground storage and exfiltration. And then sort of like, okay, if you absolutely can't do A or B, then the least you can do is just not tack on a stormwater pond, but incorporate it into the design of the project. But that being said, I think you can try to incorporate the sentiment, incorporate the statement in C.
Well, if that's what we're trying, I didn't catch that, Barrett. So I guess
Okay.
if maybe what we're trying to do, then why don't we say that? You know, the city's preference is to follow the hierarchy below. That makes
Well, we try to do that preferred. We can make it more explicit if that's not clear, but we try to say the preferred method is this. If that's not possible, then this is preferred. And then we're like, no matter what, you have to do this. So that's kind of was our thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't. Yeah, okay. I guess I didn't pick it up like that. Okay, that makes sense.
But you're right, because then, I mean, well, we could definitely look into incorporating C and A, though, for sure.
And then I had a question on G
Mhm.
about prohibiting having fencing unless it is demonstrated it is necessary due to the configuration and topography of the lot. Is there not? I don't see where we're going to have. I guess I kind of going back to what Matt was just pointing out. How or where would we have fencing for a stormwater facility in the downtown area?
So that would be done if you had like a vault system where it was just a very deep drop off. So fencing is required when you meet a certain slope. And when you get into an area like downtown where you're limited on space, if you have, for instance, if something gets redeveloped and they have to accommodate stormwater on site because they're increasing the impervious, and the only way to do it based on the property is to do a vault system, a very deep, almost like a moat type thing, that's when you would fence it. Because you're keeping kids and people and cars from falling into the stormwater system.
Hey, Dan, I think there's an example of that over at Minnehaha Park. Is that what you would consider? I mean, it's basically
I'm not very familiar with that site. I know 500 North Maitland, Barry Kalmanson's office has kind of a vault stormwater system in the back, and they have a fence around it. It's almost like a moat. It's just it's a deep, water conveyance.
It's in the back of the property, or the front of the property as well. And when you landscape it, you can kind of make it. It's almost like you don't notice that it's a stormwater pond. It's because it's quite small but deep, and they plant trees in it and such. But yeah, you don't want to be walking your dog and have them fall down. For sure.
yeah, I think that's what they have in Minnehaha Park. There's about a 4 or 5 foot fence around it, and it looks like a deep rectangular concrete vault that it stays full of water.
Engineering requirements, if it's more than, I think it's a 4-to-1 slope, then you have to fence it, because then you're putting in liability of kids walking in and they think it's really shallow and then all of a sudden it drops off.
Yeah, and that's what G is trying to do. Is basically we're saying don't do that unless you have to due to the requirements of the lot and the subject to safe dogs. That's not our preference, but we do. If you do have to have it, then you have to go to DRC. And I think don't we say there has to be a quality fence, or maybe we don't say that right here. Anyway, the fencing has to meet the standards of downtown. For materials. It can't just be a chain link fence.
To that point, I objected to the fence around that pond, and I thought they should have made it bigger because now it looks like a retention pond. These rules I see talk about putting fountains and things to at least make it a feature, but we didn't do that in Minnehaha, which was disappointing at the time.
The frogs love it.
Sure.
Mosquitoes too, I'm sure. And to keep the commentary. So,
Yeah, fine.
All right, anything else on 3-59? How about 3-60? So I have a question on, it's going to be on 3-60, but it's 23D. And it talks about shopping cart storage shall be located inside the building or shall be screened by a wall at least 4 feet in height, consistent with the building architecture and material. How does like shopping cart temporary storage out in the parking lots sort of fall in this?
so they would have to screen it. They'd have to screen it by a wall. What we don't want is rogue shopping carts either be floating in the parking lot or aesthetically unpleasing. So if you're not going to put it indoors or in a covered area in front of the store, it needs to be shielded by a 4-foot wall or fence or wall or material similar to the building.
Is that just on 3 sides or?
Yeah, I mean, because the cart has to be on getting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand if this was intended for, if it was speaking to that also. So you're saying it is.
Yeah, you're basically trying to shield it from view. Assuming we're going to get a use that uses shopping carts in downtown, it could happen.
Well, if Publix were to redevelop.
Yeah, if Publix were to redevelop, they'd have to. But all of their carts are inside now.
Yeah, I think because they've been way they're doing the cleaning, they're storing them out there during the day. But
And
under waivers, item number 2, waivers shall be reviewed and decided by the DRC or the planning and zoning. Is this sort of fall under that similar, some of that major and minor language? I didn't go doing any other digging, but
yes, this concept is in downtown now, and it's the idea is to kind of grant that kind of flexibility where if people are doing adaptive reuse or trying to the site constraints have trouble meeting some of these development standards, they can get some flexibility from it without having to go through a plan development for like a single use or a single site. And this just establishes who makes that decision, right? If it's a bigger adjustment or a bigger waiver request, then the idea is that it has to go through Planning and Zoning Commission. If it's less significant and we don't want to hold up the project based on a less significant change, it allows a DRC to do it. And this the Development Review Committee, just as a reminder, it's all city staff, but it's the Public Works Department, the Fire Department, and Community Development.
anything else on 3-60?
Yeah, I'm going, so just kind of going back to what you were just talking about on that chart right there.
Mhm.
With this the intensity and dimensional standards. What is the, okay, so here we go again. What is the definition of intensity? And then are we, are we, and I understand you're trying to do flexibility, but are we giving away too much with that 25%? Should it be, should that number be lower?
That's the intensity. That's a link to it actually. So if you click on the thing, it'll take you to back up to the start of the plan developments, or sorry, the downtown section. So what that's talking about is
it's your things like your setbacks
Yeah.
and your height and things like that. Because what you find is as we get into a city that is primarily, if not solely based on redevelopment, there's got to be some flexibility, because the only other option right now is either ask for a variance, which staff cannot approve, because to meet all 8 criteria of a variance is nearly impossible. And the code is very explicit. You have to meet all 8 in order to get approved. So they either have that option or go through a PD. And so if somebody has a setback of 10 feet and they need 1 extra foot to do something, rather than send them through a 9-month PD process, this is saying there's some flexibility built in that what's 25%, what's 1 foot going to do in the bigger scheme. It's something that staff should have the authority to make that call. And if it's over 25%, then it needs to go to P&Z. But the idea is to not put people through processes that are very lengthy and rigorous for a very minor variance to a design and dimensional standard.
And another important thing to note is that is things like setbacks, build to zones, adjusting the activity area. What we can't do is exceed the density or FAR or building height stories, things that are set in the comp plan. So it doesn't give, we're still bound by those requirements. We can't just decide to allow people that additional density or FAR beyond what's allowed in the comp. Does that help answer some of that specifics about that section?
So I'd like to chime in just to say there are other jurisdictions in the area that have the same type of policy, basically, X% of whatever standard can be, basically gives you wiggle room without having to go through that process. And in my profession, I have taken advantage of those standards and it's been really helpful as opposed to going through the variance process. Though I do think 25% can be a little bit high when you consider, our trend towards like urban standards. So those are probably going to be like smaller lots anyway. So then you might be giving away a little bit more than, we don't have like large greenfield sites where the difference between 20 and 25% is negligible, but we're really looking at like infill sites where that percentage can make a difference. So personally, I would prefer to see it as 20%. But of course, I'm up for consideration of what the fellow board thinks.
I was thinking 15. I just think there's a lot of this is written very staff heavy, and I understand what they're doing, but I also how much do we as P&Z give away as far as not, and I don't know the right word, but I think there's still something to be said about coming in front of planning and zoning versus just kind of circumventing it and getting it your way with an attorney and I mean, I don't know. I just struggle with that.
I mean, I'll chime in then. I think when Dan, you were describing or Barrett having somebody go through, I was thinking of making them go through hell to go back through our process, which sometimes just discourages developers. So I like that staff is empowered and they have expertise, and these boards like us turn over and change. But I look Jamie's input and expertise, and she deals with this a lot more. So maybe to go a little bit lower, but I don't think less is better. Significantly less. I would say meet in the middle of that 20% then.
So I can tell you from a staff perspective that there's certain parts of the ordinance that allowed 10%. I have worked in jurisdictions that 50% was not uncommon because, as you said, Glenn, P&Z members come and go. This takes the politics out of something that should be a good tool used for adaptive reuse or what are considered minor dimensional standards. As anybody knows, going through a PD process here, you're looking at several months, even if it's just to go to P&Z. It's time, it's money, it's a lot of work and everything for what we're talking about. Probably it's just a few feet here or there in the end. And so that's why staff and the consultant picked 25, because it seemed very reasonable. It's lower than places I've worked. It's higher than what's currently in the code, but it provides that flexibility that is really needed as we move to a redevelopment stage.
And I mean, that's not saying, I mean, just because staff has that flexibility to do that, it doesn't mean that they're going to take advantage, of it. I think I think to some level, we have to look to staff that they, are looking at the same things and believing in the same things that we're communicating. I mean, staff, they're should be looking at what council wants on this also. And I'm similar, I've been on the other side of this, and I've found myself at times sort of cringing, watching, somebody come before P&Z on some item that I just didn't understand why they were having to go through, that extra exercise. So I want us to, protect the city, but, I'm with, that statement that we don't want to run off some people that may be bringing something good to Maitland.
And it's not just for all of that stuff. It's for other things. We've had people that wanted to put a generator or change out an air conditioning, and the newer unit was a little bit bigger, but now it encroached 6 inches into the setback. And our code said, well, now you have to go through a variance, which is $300 application fee and about a 2 to 3 month process for literally 6 inches of a pad that is screened. And really, in the big scheme of things, nobody's going to tell that it moved 6 inches. So it's providing that flexibility. And as you said, Keith, DRC doesn't mean you're going to necessarily get approved. DRC has to weigh that in, and it's not just community development, it's also public works and fire. And if there's reason why it's not, we deem it's not approvable, then DRC can deny it. They can appeal it to P&Z or council, but it's not saying you're guaranteed this 25%. It says a decision body has to make a decision.
And what's currently in the code? Because you said it was the 25% is higher than what we currently have.
There's some places where there's some zones where a 10% administrative variance, but it's not in all of the zones, and it's not all of the dimensional standards.
I think in downtown was the only place where we do have these waiver requirements right now. Don't they all have to go to P&Z, or do some have an adherence?
There was some that there was a 10%, but it was
for a few things.
Yeah, very few things, and I think only 1 or 2 zones. But we have had people where literally a fence or an air conditioning replacement or something that literally encroached less than a foot into the setback. They had to go through a variance process, which we couldn't approve because it didn't meet all 8 criteria.
You said it was just 10% in some areas. What's the other number?
The other number is 0. The other number is there was no flexibility. Most of the areas there was no flexibility.
Residential zones right now. No flexibility. And again, right now we're just talking about downtown, so I think, yeah, that's.
And those are examples to me where we really, these were relatively random numbers. Like you said, you sort of picked a number that you thought gave you flexibility, but it didn't totally give you too much control. And we've done that all the time. And so to me, 0 sure is the wrong number. And I like to see you all have some level of flex. I'm okay with 25%, but if the rest of the group thinks it should be lower, to Jamie's point, 20 to me is also reasonable. And we're talking to downtown.
What's your thoughts, Matt?
I probably could be swayed a lot of different ways. I'm kind of with Glenn, to be 100% honest with you. I can appreciate where Catherine's coming from, so maybe it is a 20% and move forward with that on that.
I could live with a compromise 20%. I think the 15% might be too low.
Okay, so I'm hearing some support for 20%.
My only question would be, is council going to look at this as some sort of negotiable and try and take that even lower? And
I bet they would.
This is 25% throughout all of these different standards. So I'm assuming you would want it not just in intensity and dimensional standards, but for all. Are we talking about for, I guess, the majority of these, I would assume?
okay at 25%, especially if there's a chance it goes a little lower. Going once.
What did you, so Glenn, you said leave it at 25%?
My feeling is I'm okay with it at 25%, and you might get beat up on that at council. It is across the board. I'm not sure that's how we should be thinking this through, but that's the reality.
Well, I think at least by this, we've put a statement in front of them that this is our thoughts.
Yeah.
They'll know we made a conscious change on this. And if
Okay.
that's sort of a concern.
I agree too.
So show of hands, are we good with the 20?
I'd still like to see it. And I know this is downtown. This is just in the downtown Maitland district.
Yes. So these were adopted already. Council did already see this when the downtown stuff went through.
This is what council has adopted now.
Oh, good
Point.
Okay.
All right, I think we had a quorum.
And the reason I say that is because, I mean, that's important. Council did see these numbers, they've adopted them. The numbers came up from experience of in the trenches, that stuff that we deal with every day, that we get asked for little variances all the time. And a lot of times we don't have any authority to do anything and have to send them through a long, tedious process.
Well, and I'm the latecomer, so excuse the question, but if council approved this, then why is it coming back through this discussion?
The downtown portion of this code has already been adopted by council. However, when it went through, the idea was that P&Z and council, for that matter, would get another shot at it to take a look at the whole thing. They adopted the downtown because there was some there's a unanimous decision from council to move it forward faster. There was some talk about some potential developments that they wanted to get ahead of the game instead of behind. So they adopted this, and with the idea that when the overall code comes back, they could still look at it again and make sure it fits in with what they still wanted in the overall scheme of things.
But Dan, but then aren't there some of the language things have changed or because I've been tracking with what we reviewed back a while back, and there's just some different language in here, and I don't know if that came from what city council did, but there's just some different language in some places.
Yeah,
In the
Chairman, I can speak to that. We provided this, it did change quite a bit from the version you saw based on your comments and staff's comments. That's why we gave you the strike through underline to track that. And in addition to that, it did change as there was a lot of piecemeal kind of tacked on things that had to be added in to make this portion of the code work with the existing code. So this is now, you're now seeing it in the context of the larger land development code update. So some of the language has changed to make it consistent with other parts of the code, whereas previously the language had to be consistent with the existing code. So there is minor changes with what council adopted. However, it's almost entirely just a reorganization, right? So different portions have been moved out and moved to different parts of the code that you'll be seeing different parts of module 1 and in module 2. Some of that's tracked in the footnotes. I don't believe any of the substantive, there's been any substantive changes based on what council adopted. It's all, there might be a few tweaks in language, but that's about it. But by all means, if you find some that are substantive, please bring it to our attention and we'll figure it out. But that was not the intent.
Yeah, just one item, just because we're just this close to it. Back on that stormwater design.
Mm-hmm.
One of the items, the first item in my old draft was underground storage and exfiltration are preferred in the DM subdistrict.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see that in the current document.
What I'm sorry, we'll go back to where we were. Stormwater.
Yeah, page 3-58.
Okay.
So before, the first item on this list was underground storage and exfiltration are preferred in the DM subdistrict.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't exist in this current document.
The preferred method is through regional stormwater facilities. It's usually stormwater facilities, underground storage and exfiltration are preferred.
You're saying, what are you're saying it says in the DM subdistrict? In the
Yes.
version?
Yes.
Was that the adopted ordinance or was that the version that P&Z reviewed?
That's the version that P&Z reviewed. And that's what I'm trying to understand is there's things like that city council struck out or made comments on.
And I know we've been having trouble with the email, but I tried to upload that strike through underline version of and reposted the comments from staff and from P&Z and the changes that were posted on that to the FTP site. So you can track those changes, and I don't have that.
I'll go look. I didn't know, I didn't realize that was up there.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not, this is all tied back to the problems of communication we've had with the emails not going through, but did you
Okay.
receive the link? I did send out a link to an FTP site. Did you get that? Because if so, yeah, there's a couple different folders in there, and that's one of the strike through underline versions. So we can talk about this offline after the meeting.
No, I got the FTP side. I just didn't realize you had put that strike through document in there.
No problem. And if you have a look at that, if there's still concerns, it is important that if we did something, made a mistake, we catch it. So let's talk about that offline after the meeting.
All right. How about page 3-61?
On the, on the 3-61, the circulation, what is the definition of that? Because
Sorry,
is
where
that
are we? What page? Sorry, 361.
361 at the very first, what site access and circulation? What does that mean? Are you referring to the streets? Are you referring to drives? Are you referring to parking? Are you referring to, what is that circulation? And
Sure.
also
referring back to in this district, the site access and circulation standards. So you can get through. So it's talking about what we reviewed last time with the shared access circulation systems, transportation, street frontage. So for example, curb cuts should be no more than 1 every 25 feet. It would be due to the site, they want to have it, they need to have it within 100 feet. If it's that kind of standard, whether that goes to DRC or I guess whether we could adjust it at all. If so, how much can staff adjust it versus how much would P&Z adjust it? If they needed to the site constraints, could explain to us why they would need relief from this. And that's why this is kind of stuff like the 1-foot driveways and 2-way driveways, but fire would have to weigh in on it because they need to make sure they get access to a site. But so that would be an example where they couldn't wait. But that's for all of these, that's kind of you can link back and jump back. That's all referring to a subsection of this downtown standards.
Since you went back there real quick, like what happens when a property's not over 125 feet, but it simply makes sense to have 2 driveways?
So there's certain engineering design manuals from DOT and the engineering design manual that requires, for safety reason, minimum separation between drive aisles. What this is saying is that it can be waived up to a certain percent, usually by the public works director, if they find that there's still safety measures in place. Or for instance, in G, where it talks about an access driveway width, there may be some instances where 12 feet for 1-way or 24 feet for 2-ways can be reduced and still be made safe. And it's based on the MUTCD, which is the Manual for Uniform Traffic, something design, I forget the exact acronym, but there are times when it can be decreased by a certain percent. I think in the Grove ALF, the drive aisle access was originally at 24. The approval ended up reducing it down to 20 because they took off the on-street parking and had it as an emergency access circulation. So there's times when it's appropriate, but in general, engineering doesn't like to waive that very often.
I can assure
It's
you
rare.
our city engineer would be making this decision, not us planners, and our city engineer is quite stringent on.
But is this an example where you would have some of that empowerment of 25%?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not we meaning staff or the development review committee. What your initial question, Glenn, is, you know, if you had a small lot that did, I mean, you wouldn't be able to get we'd have to look at it individually, but yeah, there's that I think would get overridden if you needed to have access to your lot or if there was an existing access. Yeah.
Okay. It was a quick question. I don't want to be hated for going backwards.
No problem. It's important to understand what these waivers are a big deal. And it's important we understand what they're referring to, but kind of overall, you know, as we went through all these different sections of the downtown code with signs, with access, with landscaping, with parking, that's what that table in the waiver section is referring to is whether it can be waived, who can waive it, etc. So bicycle and pedestrian, any of that has to go to planning and zoning. But in general, most of them do fall down on that, you know, 20 or 25% and above and below.
Anything else on 3-61? About 3-62. About 3-63.
We are now out of downtown, so congratulations, everybody.
Victory.
I kind of have some editorial comments on the next two, if that would be helpful. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this. Oh, wait, never mind. This is for city and owned property. The idea is to have maximum flexibility. But yeah, sorry, I was thinking of a different version. I will be quiet.
Comments on 3-64.
Yeah, I did on the chart where you're talking about redevelopment on the lot coverage max. If you're talking about redevelopment on a property, it's not possible for commercial with that 30% for a development. I don't think that is a realistic number.
This is the GAP district, the government, arts, and public. So this is things like our public parks, our public library, it's anything that's owned by the government, the city, the parks, and in certain areas within the arts overlay district.
That being said, we did talk about taking out a lot coverage out of some zones. So if that's something we want to look at, removing that, I don't think that hurts. We're just specifically in this zone where we try to give ourselves as much flexibility as possible.
I would be very happy if you took lot coverage out of all the districts. Because I mean, Jamie, I know you're laughing, but you know it's already covered in the impervious surface and the setbacks and everything. That's going to dictate a lot of your lot coverage anyway. It just seems a redundant. Sorry, I'll shut up.
You can tell that we both like talking about these topics, but sometimes this is your meeting, not ours.
I'll make signs and t-shirts and all kinds of stuff for our next meeting. Remove lot coverage.
Please. So, Commissioner McIver, is that kind of consistent with your comment? Do you think we want to consider about just deleting it?
Well, again, if we're trying to give, and maybe I'm getting confused, but I mean, if this is just property that the government owns, that's all we're talking about as far as the city-owned property?
Yes. and the uses that are allowed, we'll pick that up in the next article. But right, it's not going to be retail or office or.
But or again, it goes back to, are we limiting ourselves? Or
Yeah,
limiting?
I think it's a good catch. That certainly doesn't. Yeah, it's redundant with the impervious coverage. First of all.
So I do have a question. Does this apply as well to utilities and substations?
If it is a government-owned property, yes.
So by that standard, for say a lift station, you maybe only need a half an acre of land, but if you have this lot coverage restriction, then you would need more land to be able to put your lift on.
True.
Good point. So are you saying you want to remove lot coverage?
Doesn't sound like me. Yes.
Or you got to type it in there real quick before they change their mind?
I already did.
Okay.
I'll remove the question mark.
Put an exclamation point instead.
No.
We all good with that?
Yep.
I'm fine with it.
So before we talked about, when I kind of introduced this article, we talked about how we're consolidating all of our zones. Not entirely true, because this is in fact a new zone. Nothing in the city is currently zoned for this, and we are just proposing it new. So the idea is this would be on the edge of the residential neighborhood, serve as a transition for walkability and real small businesses like coffee houses or restaurants or services that would serve the neighborhood.
Okay, so then my question is, where on the map would this be?
This is unmapped because there is no zone yet. It would have to be a rezoning. So it's not permitted by right anywhere. They would have to rezone a property to this NC to allow it.
With what in mind? Like where do we imagine this might happen?
Well, I think if you have some areas on more higher traffic intersections that may not be as suitable for a single family house, but could be something like a service that's used by the residents, maybe a walkable pub or something like that. When we brought this to, we brought it to Councilor P&Z or both, and said this is kind of a new concept that we're floating out. Is anybody interested in it? And they said, yeah, let's. We're not opposed to it at this time. So we don't know exactly where it would go or if any of them would come in, but it would probably be something around an intersection. It's not going to be embedded deep in a residential neighborhood or anything like that. It would be somewhere that
But it
has
could be,
adequate flow.
right?
I'm sorry?
I said it could be, right?
Embedded in a neighborhood?
Yeah.
I think it would be very difficult because they'd have to go through a rezoning and claim that that's not spot zoning and that it's consistent with the immediate surrounding area.
Yeah,
So-
it goes back to the intent. And I think that's important to look at. When you look at the zoning, you will look at the purpose and whether it will be appropriate. So it's portions of a block of a few storefronts with limited on-street parking, neighborhood serving uses of having pedestrian oriented, consistent with the neighborhood scale, and then it talks about the uses. So that would be the burden of the applicant to demonstrate how that would be compatible with the surrounding area.
So
Uh,
Maitland Avenue might be an example.
No, Maitland Avenue is already going to be non-residential. This would be more of a neighborhood commercial type thing. So maybe along certain parts of maybe Horatio or some other heavily trafficked residential, but still on the outskirts of the residential. It's something that I honestly may or may not ever come. If it does, it has to go through the rezoning process, which means P&Z council, they would have to decide on if the applicant gave that burden of proof that it meets everything and it's compatible.
So we're not, our intent is not to try to identify, we're letting applicants, so this could be, someone that has a single lot says, hey, I want to do this, I want to add part of this to my residence, then that comes to the city.
Yeah, I mean, we really see it more of if there's a vacant lot, not in the middle of a neighborhood, but for a house that gets torn down because it's organically growing into more of an office type setting, or it's something really cool that neighbors want to have something they can walk to, whether it's a daycare or a pub or something like that. And again, it's one of those things that we don't know if it's ever going to happen. And if it does, it's going to be scrutinized through the public hearing process, and it's going to require P&Z and council to sign off on it. What the intent was is that some of the more aggressive cities have these type of things, and whether Maitland is ready for it yet, we don't know. That's why it may not happen for quite some time.
Yeah, it's the idea of the 15-minute neighborhood where no matter where you live, you can walk or bike to kind of your essential services, and to kind of maybe fill in some of those gaps in Maitland where those don't exist right now. But again, it would be an appropriate, we'd have to look at each on a case-by-case basis. But right now, we're just looking at the zone district. It's definitely a fair question about what kind of places would be considered for that. And that is covered, like I said, in the purpose, but that's the idea.
So
Go
this would,
back to the map, because
Sure.
I want to see if the legend on that map that you were showing.
Sure.
If you're familiar with Boston, there's a Dunkin' Donuts pretty much within a 15-minute walk anywhere in that city.
Okay, see, because that's where I'm confused, because if you look at that legend for this map here, the very bottom circle says NC.
Correct. And nothing's that color.
Nothing on the map is colored NC. It would have to be rezoned to that.
Okay, well, everybody's
It's just
printer.
identifying that it exists as an option.
would you call sort of what some of the at Baldwin Park area is that sort of a similar application where you've got it's predominantly residential, but there's a sprinkling of commercial venues?
Yeah, you see it a lot in downtown that start organically growing from homes to home occupations to small offices. You see it in things like Celebration has them. It's not uncommon as long as it's vetted through a public hearing process and it's not just randomly stuck in the middle of a street of a neighborhood and someone says, I want to convert my house to a hair salon or something like that. It's got to serve its purpose in the right place in the right area.
So Baldwin Park is designated as village center, which is a little bit more intense than what is being proposed here. The city of Orlando has what sounds to be a comparable district in certain sub areas that is called neighborhood center. And, I think what's being proposed is a great idea. However, I think you're going to have a hard time getting people to do that. You know, if it's what the underlying zoning is, and if you want to develop there, then you have to meet those standards, and you have to have some kind of transition between the commercial and the residential, and you have all that built into the zone, and it's an existing zone, then that would be a much different like final product. But I think you might run into people not really wanting to pursue that when they could locate elsewhere and maybe have something a little more intense.
I honestly, I don't see this happening anytime really soon. I think we set it up so that for future growth, if it happens organically, again, we don't know the future. We don't know what's going to happen. We may have a lot of people working from home and may want a little neighborhood convenience store or pub or something that the option is there. It's not mapped. We don't have any in place. We're not proposing any in place. We're just saying, as the city grows or changes or evolves, this is an option that would be on the books already.
Yeah, it adds to that sort of goal of flexibility that we're talking about, and sustainability. You know, having that option, so it's not baked into our code that it has to be this way. That it has to be in a commercial area. Your residential areas are over here, and that if you want to have a commercial activity, then you have to rezone it to commercial, like that would allow for more intense commercial use. This is allowing for, and we'll get to that when we get to Article 4. You'll see the types of uses that are allowed there. It is that kind of intermediary transitional zone. So it's part of that, having that flexibility where we may not need it, but having that tool available if somebody wants to do something really innovative, this would be available for them.
Great. Any more comments on 3-66? 3-67? About 3-68? All right, we are at 3-70 PD Plan Development District. Any comments on 3-70?
I do have a question on 3. Lower development and housing costs. What does it?
Sorry, are we on
3.5.3 number A, purpose number 3.
Got it.
So basically what that's saying is urban sprawl is not conducive to lowering development and housing costs. So a planned development, a planned community, a better use of the land is actually more beneficial and more cost effective to the city as well as new development. It provides more affordable housing, not affordable housing, but it allows for a better use of the land and a better use of economic growth.
Well, I guess part of my question, what I'm, because, so Jamie, you're good at what you do every day. I'm on the road every day and I go anywhere drive through 6 to 10 different cities. So this exercise has actually been very good for me because now I'm actually paying attention to what I see, what I drive, how tall monument signs are outside of Home Depots. I mean, I'm actually
slippery slope, be careful.
But I'm paying attention because I see what we're supposed to be thinking about and looking at. And one of the things, my one question that comes up and I don't quite understand, I feel like we're trying to make Maitland a square peg and put it into a round hole. Why do we want such high density on some of these projects when when I've talked to people who live in the city, they're like, no more. We don't need more apartments. We don't need more. We need something that will have less, it's not so transitional, number one. And number two, when you take Maitland as a city, we're 6 square miles. You take the lakes out, we're like 4. But then, why are we trying to be something that I don't, we're not downtown Orlando. We're not an area where everybody else has bigger land mass. The Apopka's like 35 square miles, and they've got all the land in the world. Winter Garden, Ocoee, Winter Park. I mean, Winter Park's twice our size. But so why do we want to up the density to be something other than a bedroom community? That's why I was asking, where's this, who is our population and who are we trying to design for? Because we are a bedroom community to the Metro Orlando area, and that's why people are drawn here, because of who we are. So why do we want to change that? And I guess that's what I'm trying to ask, and I'd like to get what the other commissioners think about this. Okay, is there a t-shirt for it?
I think our video's frozen.
I thought,
I mean, do you want, well, we'll let the other commissioners weigh in before staff answers our answer.
Well, I appreciate preserving things, but I think there has to be some way of allowing some kind of, growth. My perspective when I look, I've watched Maitland do a lot of nice things, but I've also watched us have a lot of vacant lots for long periods of time. And, is that because we've been too restrictive, or I don't know that answer. I think the density, it has the pros and the cons. Some of the restaurant, do we want restaurants? Do we want venues, or do we not? And I'm back and forth on this fence all the time, but seems like those are the question mark we're trying to answer when we talk about who we are. Other perspectives?
No, I agree. I mean, I think, the reality is there's a lot of opportunity or a lot of diversity of what we are throughout the city. And, I think that, given how we are, east of I-4 versus west of I-4 is a significant difference. Even, west of 1792 versus east of 1792 is a big difference. And so, I think we've naturally got that diversity of what the city is. And to Keith's point about, certain aspects around the downtown or the PD district, I think does provide, having this type of approach is going to, incentivize some development. I mean, I don't think it does the city any good to sit there with a bunch of vacant areas for, decades. And this seems to be things that are going to spur, interest.
And I understand, I totally agree with some of the stuff needs to be redeveloped and changed and have a new thought process to it. But part of me is trying to struggle with trying to figure out who is our customer? Who are we trying to help here? And trying to understand what we're trying to achieve for the city in the future. Because we don't want it to be another 50 years before this happens again. So trying to have an open mind, but also just shoving density in everywhere we look or go, is that really the answer? Is that really what the citizens of Maitland want us to do, is just shove as much density in every little square inch of the city? And that's part of my question.
That sometimes our rules, which we try and establish as many as possible that apply as appropriately as imaginable, but sometimes they don't apply. And so to me, having this type of flexibility allows somebody to come in with a level of creativity that maybe we didn't see before. We didn't have a rule established for it, and they're given some opportunities to present something that we should consider.
Dan, you were wanting to share a thought?
I would love to share some thoughts. And it's a good question, Kathleen. It really is. So we are a city that cannot grow out. There's no room to grow out. So the only way to grow is to grow up. We know, based on all the statistics, that there's an influx of between 1,000 and 1,500 people in the Central Florida region. Our data inventory analysis says that in the next 20 years, we're going to be at a population of about 35,000. We know people are coming here. We can't grow out, so we have to grow up. What the densities are on the table now were set by council through the comprehensive development plan. And what this does, and we promised through this comprehensive development plan, that if you allowed the growth to occur in the downtown and in the west side, we're not going to encroach into the neighborhoods. We're not going to increase the densities in the neighborhoods. We're going to keep traditional families areas the way they are now, because we know that is the true cornerstone of this city. Is a lot of the residents like the standard of living they're used to. Along with growth in general, like any living organization, any living being, any organization, profit or nonprofit, if you're not growing, you're dying, and you have to grow at least the rate of inflation. So we can't just say we don't want to grow anymore. But planning for it is the important part. It's just like saying your insurance costs go up 3% every year. So you want your paycheck to go up at least 3% a year, because you've got to maintain that level of lifestyle you're used to. It's the same thing with the city. If we're not growing the rate of inflation, we're in a decline. And once you get in that decline spiral, it's real difficult to pull a city out. And that turns the values down considerably. It's not a good, healthy thing for a city. So the code implements the comp plan that council adopted as the densities. And in doing so, we said, if you let us grow in these couple areas, we'll leave the traditional neighborhoods alone and not encroach into them, so that they can still afford the lifestyle that they're used to and the levels of services they're used to without raising taxes or cutting services. So we do allow for growth, just in controlled areas. So hopefully that answers some of it. I know Barrett has some stuff that he wants. Oh, he
covered it.
Okay. Barrett's going to throw me under the bus. No, I'm kidding. So that's staff's reason. As professional planners and a planner that has worked in a city that has declined in the past, it's not a pretty sight, and it goes downhill very fast. You start getting into code enforcement problems. You start getting into a lot of different things, that broken window theory. So all we're doing is implementing the council adopted densities and controlling where that growth occurs, so that we're protecting the residents. What this code does is protects those residents far greater than the existing code does, by adding a hybrid transect form-based code to soften it as you go closer to the neighborhoods, mimicking the heights, the intensities, things like that. But if we don't grow somewhere, we're either raising taxes, cutting services, or in a decline. And that's not an area where any city wants to be.
Dan, I'm trying to remember, you showed us something one time, and my memory was that it was some kind of 3D vertical study that was basically showing, based on what our codes, what we could be.
So in the downtown, when we adopted the downtown, we had kind of a height step requirement in the form-based code that showed what it could be like. At one point, and you may be thinking of the tax valuation map that showed the tax value per area. That was a graphic I showed you guys a while ago, probably before Kathleen, and definitely before Kathleen was on and met. But we don't have any more single family left. Everything that we grow now is going to be multifamily or townhouses or non-residential. We just don't have any single family land left. We've got maybe one 7-lot subdivision and one potential subdivision up along Mechanic Street. The rest of it, we're going to be seeing multifamily or non-residential, and that's, I know it's not easy to stomach necessarily, because we have had the opportunity to grow out for a while, but that's not the case anymore.
Well, and I think the fact of the matter is, and I don't know what the definition of bedroom community is, right? But, in some ways we're getting closer and closer to a larger metropolitan area every year. So, the makeup of what Maitland is in 2020 relative to its place within the regional metropolitan area is different than it was, 10, 20, 60 years ago. And it's going to continue to be that way. The whole area is growing. So I think that there's going to be some people, right, that don't like that density, and that's going to be the case. But I don't think that changes what's happening around us and what's going to continue to happen. So.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I've appreciated about Maitland is, as I'm out, doing different runs and things, is the fact that where we're looking at allowing some of this height, you're through it in just a few blocks. So I can jump from one neighborhood, I run through what's the higher, and then I'm into another neighborhood. So it's like it is controlled, and it's not like you're all of a sudden in a sea of high-rise buildings. You may pop through, but you don't necessarily get lost, because we have such a bit of a sliver graphic, from at least from a downtown standpoint.
And to add to that, part of the city's long-term plans, they adopted the downtown master plan many years ago. They updated it about 2 years ago. A lot of these adopted plans, including the master plan, says we want to create a sense of place. We want to create a place where you can be seen, a sense of identity. Downtown was very important. But for instance, like Sanford Brewery and some of the other desirable restaurants and things like that, they won't come unless they have a certain number of rooftops or a certain number of people that can support that. We would have never gotten Sanford Brewery here had we not had the MCC and some of the apartment growth around us, because they need those rooftops to sustain them.
Good discussion.
And I don't know if it's helpful in the context of the plan development section, which we're on. It doesn't increase the density. It doesn't increase the FAR. What it does allow is more flexibility, again, to preserve more open space if you want to have, the smaller network of streets and the more efficient use of land to have it than it would be under traditional zoning. So that's taken in that context. It's not just density or piling on density, but it's allowing for a creative mix and trying to actually preserve some of the natural space as well. But currently, those of you who have dealt with plan developments in Maitland, it's a little bit different. What we have now is, we had kind of a, frankly, fairly confusing, where we have a type 1 and a type 2 plan development, and you have to constantly explain. One is more conceptual, one is less conceptual. This simplifies that, kind of discards that concept, and really breaks it down into three things. The plan, a PD master plan. So you have a plan for the PD. You have kind of the more legalistic portion of it, which is your agreement. So that's required as well. So when you would reviewing it, you'd be reviewing the plan, you'd be doing the agreement, which is more like the conditions, what they're saying. And the third portion of it is the compensating community benefits. Like, why do they need, what are they providing? What is this PD achieving that justifies having to have this additional flexibility in the development standards? Hopefully it's simpler and easier. And then once this is approved, all the development going forward will follow the PD plan, the PD agreement, and the outcome will be these compensating benefits, which are incorporated in both of those documents, both of those approvals.
The ones that I've been involved in, it's not, you tend to want to look at this like we're allowing more things with this, but in some cases it's a balance. You actually, once you've got into here, you can restrict some other things more than we currently have. So I think it allows for that balance, that you may allow something, but you take something else away because it's more reasonable for this effort. Anything else on 3-70? 3-71? How about 3-72? This on 3-72, this item 3A talks about the West Side Design Standards.
Yeah, we don't have those yet. Those are coming in module 3, actually. They exist. I mean, we have the current ones, and the consultants are working on, modifying, simplifying, modernizing, updating those. But that's kind of a placeholder for right now.
Well, is that what it's going to come in with, that label, or is that just some placeholder verbiage?
Yeah, this is just a placeholder. It's because like downtown, because downtown has its own PD district, right? If you remember with the DICE and everything like that, there's a downtown PD district, and we don't have a special West Side district, but there are certain requirements in the West Side district, so they're going to have to. We're going to have to decide based on all this, like which of those we're going to allow them to waive or propose change, and which ones can't. So until we know exactly what those are, we can't describe in the PD which ones they can and cannot change. So if you think of it that way, this is going to be any exceptions to the West Side Design Standards that we're going to allow, because that's like the block configurations, access standards. Those are going to be unique to the West Side District. And once we know what those are, we can plug in here which ones they can propose changes to.
Okay. Comments on 3-73?
What's the thought around water and wastewater facilities? I mean, is it intended that they would have that? On-site potable water and wastewater facilities?
If there are any, sure. If it's like a neighborhood or something, they might have like a lift station or I think that's what it kind of goes along with the utilities, but if there are any, yeah, you'd want to see where they are, and that would be a part of the plan.
So if required, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Three 74. On the bottom of the page, development phasing plan. I see language about, okay, I see it now. I was looking for not just sequence and phases, but timing restrictions. I see it. I see the verbiage now. How do we work with these groups if we set a phase plan and there's some portion deemed that for whatever reason it doesn't go forward? What's our protection on that?
That's a tough one. If with phasing and plan developments, what happens if they don't go forward? What happens if it's really tough. You can't really the mechanism under which we could enforce the phasing plan.
The idea of a PD is that when you phase it, each phase has to be a standalone. So if it doesn't go forward, each phase can stand alone.
And then I think you start getting into the question of minor changes versus major changes. And, you know, as these things evolve and the market changes, they do begin to drift and differ from what's set out in the plan. And we talk at a later time about what constitutes a minor change and a major change and when they need to go through that public process again, when they differ. I mean, that's moving right into Q, a conversion schedule. If they decide, you know, the demand's not there that they anticipated for one kind of use, then they can convert it to another kind of use that's laid out front to provide a little bit of built-in flexibility. But to move beyond that, they would have to go back to the public process.
Yeah.
Going back to that conversion schedule, and part of what you were just talking about with the time development, for live work unit, is that considered as a residential unit in a development like this?
I believe so. That's going to Article 4, residential household living. Yep, it's considered a household living residential use, a live work dwelling. And that's it throughout the city, not just in the PD, but yeah.
Okay.
I have more of a clerical comment on the development phasing plan. it kind of seems like the sentence just tapered off. It says a development phasing plan that identifies the general whatever, including ... And then it kind of just ends. It doesn't say like is required, or it just lists all the aspects that might be included in it.
Oh yeah, it's definitely, yeah, well, it's definitely a run-on sentence, isn't it? It might be, makes more sense to have it be bulleted or.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Thank you.
Any others on 3-75?
Actually, on number 6, I guess it's 2A6. Any other provisions the city council determines are relevant and necessary to the development of the PD district. Why is it the city council and not planning and zoning?
Well, the city council are the ones that are going to ultimately approve the PD agreement. But it would go through planning and zoning first. So you guys would make the recommendation. You could recommend provisions. This is just supposed to be a catch-all. But I think the same could be said about staff, right? I mean, staff would recommend it, and P&Z would recommend it, add some recommendations, and then finally city council. But we could change that wording to be more inclusive.
Well, ultimately, it still comes down to city council. I mean, they're still final say.
Yeah. I think it's, yeah, advisory boards. I think you could say that you could clarify that, you know, staff and advisory boards and commissions are also going to be, they might not determine it, but they might raise the issues.
How about page 3-76?
Yeah, it actually starts at the end of 3-75, but you know, the compensating community benefits. Is this just kind of like a catch-all way to ask them that they may have to do more for anything, or is there some sort of benefit or special considerations for these things? It kind of just seemed pretty vague to me, and I just didn't know what the process or purpose of it really was.
So the benefits are outlined, examples, but not limited to, in A through D below that. Basically, the concept of a PD is kind of a give and take. So if you don't want to go with the straight zoning, you're usually doing a PD because you want something that you couldn't have done in that straight zoning district. So generally when PDs come in and ask for something outside of the regulations, they generally show something that they're giving in return. It's a give and take. It's not just, I just don't like these regulations, so I'm going to set my own. It's, I'm going to set my own, and in doing that, you're going to get this, or I will do this. That's generally how the PDs work.
So these are shalls, so they are required then. Okay.
Well, they're going to be incorporated both. It's basically making the applicant be explicit about tying what he's doing back into this purpose. This is how I look at it. It's making him tie it back into the purpose of the planned development district. And it has to be incorporated into the proceeding two documents, which is the plan, the master plan, and the agreement, to say, you know, why, to him to justify the purpose of his individual plan development. And I would say tying it back into these 9 objectives or 9 purpose had the plan development in the first place. But it's vague because I mean, it gives them certainly a certain amount of flexibility. If you see, it's, you know, the catch-all at the end. I think they just make it to be explicit, other than, like Dan said, I don't want to follow the rules.
Yeah, I guess, but I guess maybe I was thrown because it says they shall do this, these benefits shall be in addition, but then it says they may include this or not. I mean, maybe I'm getting a little bit legalistic in the language, but I just don't know, how does it get enforced in the review process?
Well, I guess it's generally enforced in the fact that the sites are negotiated. If most PDs that come in, there is a lot of negotiation that comes along before it even gets to P&Z, and then often negotiated again, and then again council, because in order to
So these are,
relax.
yeah, I get it. So these are some leverage that the city has in those negotiations then, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that helps. How does this, I mean, how does this, do these items and this kind of, you know, maybe options of negotiation chips that exist here, how does this relate to how, I mean, you're feeling like these are items that kind of cover that? It gives a lot of flexibility for
Well,
the city?
and number 5 kind of gives the total flexibility. And
Wow.
even at the first letter says including but not limited to. So it gives, you know, there may be things in here that we're not thinking of, that a developer may say, you know what, if you give me this, I'll give you something that you weren't even thinking about. And so it provides that out, that there may be some things. And I don't think you were on when we did the DICE ordinance, but the DICE ordinance is the same thing. It said, in order to get the extra densities,
Right.
you have to provide one of these, but you can also propose something else. And if it's, you know, council agrees to it and it's something that is rational nexus, then it can be considered.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on 3-76 or 3-77? All right. 3-78 Downtown Maitland Plan Development District.
This was again, you know, part of what was adopted by council already. But the main difference is that it's downtown, but it also includes the density incentive for community enhancement program, which allows them to go over what's typically allowed for density in FAR in exchange for, you know, a defined community benefit, which we exhaustively debated over about a year with the city council. That started right after we adopted the comp plan, you know, introduced that concept.
So can we go back to the chart on 7-9?
Sure.
On the between the DMPB and then the edge district, why is the block length different? I mean, why can't it just be the same?
It is the same, the min max. There's a minimum of 300.
Oh,
a
it's all
maximum
for
of
the same thing. Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I misread that. Okay.
It is I understand why, but that's, yeah. It makes sense when you compare it to here, where it's, you know,
All the other ones read. Yeah, well, that's why I see that now.
yeah. No, good question.
And then on the building height on the it says 6 stories. Now on the edge zone, what is appropriate for a step down that we've talked about before?
Well, the neighborhood compatibility standards are gonna apply, but what Dan would,
Yeah.
oh,
And I was gonna scroll up to see all the people.
the height. Has
What was the first?
it was 6 stories for a particular site determined as part of the concept plan approval. And why is it different with the edge?
Because the edge is where the compatibility standards really kick in, and so you're tapering it down as you're getting close to the traditional neighborhood. We talked about the growth, and part of that was we protect the neighborhoods. So this is saying the closer you get to the neighborhoods, the more you have to taper down in your height and your intensity, your lighting standards, things like that.
Correct, but it doesn't have, it doesn't say that, I don't think, and that's why I was asking.
It doesn't say it as far as the neighborhood compatibility standards go into the specifics of how that happens.
Why isn't it explicit for the edge? Well, we could definitely look into having some language linking that, making that link explicit, so people don't think that they can get 6 stories right next to a, residential single family neighborhood. That's fair. I think that's a good.
Thank you. You understand what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking on the building height. I know we went through this before. P and Z, we proposed putting a 6-story max on this. And it was in lieu of the language to be determined as part of DM-PD concept plan approval. And I guess I look at this and I don't know that it's almost like it's a humor note up there, because I don't know what a particular site means in this instance.
Hmm.
I mean, it's still put all of it. I mean, it's not really in that 6-story means nothing in all this.
Well, if maybe this is helpful, 6 stories is set in the comprehensive plan. So it can't be exceeded without a comp plan amendment. However, for a particular site, they're basically saying it's part of that. It's going to be looked within the context, right? So you're not guaranteed 6 stories. It's going to be, for a particular site, it's to be determined as part of the concept plan approval. What my way to think about this is that typically if it's a larger site, then it's going to have different height limitations in different portions of the site. That's, I think, the idea. Whether that could be explained better. Do you have some language you'd like, or something you'd like to see in there that would have that make sense?
I think I need to go back to that markup we talked about and just look at that.
Okay.
I mean, it may be what we're seeing here is that the city council came back and said, no.
Well, no, I mean, the downtown, sorry to go backwards, Dave, we're gonna see that me, but yeah, if you look at the downtown district, it did have height sets because it had a maximum heights in the 6 stories were translating to that. Is that it? Can I find it? Yeah. Okay. So you might be also thinking of the downtown district as opposed to downtown PD.
No, I'm looking at my notes.
Oh, you're looking at the version before. What did it have before, just out of curiosity?
When we looked at it, it said the building height max, and in the info it said to be determined as part of DM-PD concept plan approval. So, and I think we had proposed putting a 6-foot max. So it looks like somehow it just ended up being converted to just adding that 6 stories for a particular site on top of the language that was already there.
Did you, okay, so you think that was done in error?
I don't know. I need to go back and look. I'll go back and look at your markup. I
Okay.
guess my point is I don't understand for a particular site how when you add that, that's you're still again that particular site, I guess, as determined as part of the DMPD. So I don't know that the 6-story is really a restriction.
So you think it could go above 6 stories? Is what you're saying?
Yes.
In the comprehensive plan, I think in the Main Street future land use district, it says there's a 6-story maximum. So I think that's why even in a PD, you could not propose a 7-story building without amending the future land use section of the CDP. But maybe I'm not understanding. I'm sorry, I was kind of late. I might be missing your point, and I apologize. So let's just say
Well, I guess what way I read this, unless you reference something as a max, that it's saying that, I mean, with all this other verbiage in there, it's leading you to believe that it can be more than 6 stories.
Oh, I see. Because it says here in the column, they'll have max 6 stories for bigger site. Okay, right. I understand now. Yes, by that 6 stories is not to be exceeded, even as determined as part of the DMPD concept plan approval. Got it.
I mean, does anybody, I just see that as an open door. I mean, does anybody else see that it's an open door for over 6 stories?
That's a good observation. I didn't catch it, but I see what you're saying.
No, I do too. I do too now. Thank you. Thank you for walking me through that slowly. But I get it now. No, but he's saying that this might lead you to believe that you can go over it. It's just a misleading the way it's phrased. The second part might lead you to believe you could exceed it, and that's not the case. It's okay. We figured it out, man. I'll explain to you later.
Thank you.
I'll do it in a picture.
I like pictures better.
Now, if it's trying to say that if the intent that it's saying 6 stories the max, but that's only for particular sites, that's not everywhere. It just doesn't read that way to me.
You're right. I agree with you. And we just knew the intent. So that's how we read it. But if you don't know the intent, then you could definitely read it as saying you could exceed 6 stories, which we don't want to lead people to do. Duly noted.
Anything else on 3-79? How about 3-80? All right, so I guess we're going into use regulations.
Sorry. Big milestone. Good work.
So we'll target our 8:30. So we'll see if we can work out about 20 minutes of Article 4. Any question on the commentary page? How about 4-1? Four dash 2. I just want us to make a mental footnote of this, of the bracket 2 down here, the abbreviation and principal use table. And then look at the table index when we get to those. We may want to come back and look at that.
Yep, permitted, conditional, and then this means it's not a guarantee, it just means it's part of the PD negotiation. It's allowed in a PD, but not guaranteed.
How about 4-3? So I have a question on principal use versus accessory uses. I mean, do we ever, is there sort of a percentage idea? I guess I was thinking if, you have a principal use, but the accessory use starts dominating the use of that building. Do we have any language to sort of the percentage that makes it a principal and what stays an accessory?
Yeah, I think you'd have to look. I think that's covered in section 4.3, which I think you start getting into. Oh, sorry, for the accessory use section. I want to say it has a definition. So
We could just make a note and look at it when we get there.
what is the right? It's secondary, and so once it stops being secondary and becomes a principal use, then it's essentially a code enforcement issue, right?
Yeah, and different places define it differently. Some places say 30% is an accessory use. Some places like restaurants, as long as 51% of your sales are food, you're not a bar. So some places accessory is less than 50%. I've worked in some places where 30%, an accessory use like a shed as an accessory use to the house can't be more than 30% of the square foot, or a daycare within an existing church can't be more than 30% of the building, things like that. So if a percentage is something we want to add, we can absolutely do that.
This is kind of helpful because it's like with 459, it talks about the standards for accessory uses, and once they're no longer an accessory use, then they cross that threshold where this isn't a percentage, because sometimes it's hard to say, but it has to be clearly incidental and subordinate. It has to not be of a nature likely to attract visitors in a larger number than would normally be expected in a residential neighborhood. Not involved. So it involves the zone district. So part of it is what might be considered an accessory use in downtown. It might be different than a residential neighborhood, but that's the criteria we would use in determining whether something stopped being an accessory use and became a principal use.
Yeah, I'm not hung up on it being a percentage, as long as we feel like we have language in here that we know what that looks like and what it should say.
Yeah, subordinate is kind of the key word, right? If it's no longer a subordinate use, it becomes the principal use. Then if it's not allowed in that zone, then you've got a problem.
Okay. Anything else on 4-3? How about 4-5? So a general question about this, we're being told to go through this and not look at it from a standpoint of where this sits on the map, but I think we're drawn into that in these use tables, aren't we?
Yes. I would, yes, I think I agree with that. Where, yeah, in of the fact that these districts where they exist now and they represent consolidations of districts, yeah, absolutely, you have to consider that. Would you not agree, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, you have to consider that. One thing you do want to keep in mind is that that map is very conceptual. That's not this is the end all where the district is going to be. So what we're looking at these tables is in that RSF1 that is defined in dimensional parameters is a detached dwelling unit, a permitted, acceptable as a permitted use in that district. If we do bounce back and forth between the map, that's okay. Just know that the map is not set in stone right now. And it may be that we do bounce back and say, you know what, this area shouldn't be RSF1. It should be RSF2 or something like that. The map has, the staff put a lot of thought into it, but by no means is it a product that we're saying this is the way the zones should lay out. It's logical, it follows patterns consistent with this table, but it's very possible some things need to be tweaked.
So how do we go about this from a review standpoint? So if we're reviewing these documents ahead of the map,
At the time of adoption, we haven't really completely come to a decision about how we're going to do this, but I would suspect that it's going to look very different, very similar to how we did the downtown, where there'll be a map amendment of the official zoning map that would run concurrently with the code amendment. So you'd basically be adopting these, and then separately you would do a map amendment that would change the existing zoning map from its different zone districts to the new zone districts. And you would have those, you would have that discussion at that time. And we would do a lot more QA/QC on the zoning map to make sure that we correctly translated the existing zoning districts into the proposed zoning districts.
so is that saying that we would be re-reviewing the particular categories when we review the map, then there would be revisions if we felt needed to the table?
The way we look at it is this is the code, and then the code is tied to the various districts, right? So you're establishing the districts. Right now, all the parcels in the city have a particular zone, and ultimately we're going to have to decide what of the new zone districts they all get. But the default would be that they would essentially all look like this. If this is, once we do the QA/QC, that they would translate from their existing zone district. But but for example, when the cultural corridor goes away, those have to be split between GAP, RMX, and downtown. Those decisions are also informed by the future land use map of the comprehensive plan. So those are really the only two documents that will be informing the map amendment is the existing zoning and the future land use, both of which are already adopted. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but
So my
we're basically not going to be saying like voting up or down different individual parcels throughout the city and assigning a zone district to them.
Chairman, if it helps, I can tell you how staff went about this. Is we went and knew which existing zoning districts were going to convert into the new zoning districts. We worked on this table first of what uses were appropriate in those zoning districts based on what was existing and being converted. And we did the map last. After we did all of these, we said, okay, how does that map based on the existing zoning districts that are being converted? And then another finer look at how does that relate to these uses to where they are contextually. So that's how staff did it. The map was the last thing we did after doing the uses and the conversions and the use specific standards. and dimensional standards. If P and Z wants to go through them both at the same time, we can, just as a, as a visual reference of where we're talking about a multifamily dwelling in RMF would lay out in the city. I can tell you when we did the map, we did it based on the conversion of what these zoning districts converted from and to, and where they were, and how that would blend into what the proposed zoning map would be.
But from your review standpoint, absolutely, if it's useful to understand the context of where in the city we're talking about these different zones, by all means, we should refer to this map, which is in your FTP site in your folders, by all means.
So what I'm trying to clarify is this planning and zoning's opportunity to look at table 4.2.2 and say, we agree that for dwelling, single family detached, RSF-1, P is appropriate. That we agree P is appropriate. Is this our only opportunity to do that?
This is the, not, I wouldn't go as far as say the only, but this is the appropriate time to do that, yes.
Okay, so we need to do a more thorough look at what you've got conceptually as the map with the detail of this. And that's what I want to clarify, because of,
What I would recommend doing is following similar to what staff did, is look at the uses, look at how they fit in the zoning, and then we'll take a look at how that plays out in the map. The map, there's very few things that didn't convert perfectly from what was converted. So there's only a small handful where staff had to make a decision of what is this most compatible with, what is this most like what's existing today. So I would recommend we do the uses and the districts they fall in, and then we go back and look at the map and how that plays out. And if we need to change the map where one area we may have it as RSF3 and you say, no, we think that's really RSF2, I think that should fall in after the uses. It would be my recommendation. That doesn't have to be the way it is.
But I think it's hard because you're asking us to make a decision about the WS district and sub-districts that are still under development. And you're asking us to make decisions about what is allowable or permitted or conditional, but we don't even know what you're talking about. Is that Maitland Center? Or, I mean, we don't even know what you're thinking, so we don't even know where to apply it.
So the WS is the west side. It's everything west of I-4. It's in this map, it's the purple. So that's the WS, that's the west side district.
And I think you're right. I think it's fine to refer to this map. I think we're maybe talking about a couple different things. It's definitely instructive to refer to this map to help you understand the areas of the city which we are proposing where these zones go, or where these zones would go with a straight conversion. What I think we don't want to do is start discussing what color goes where on this map. What we want to stick the discussion to is this.
yeah, no,
what they use the district. But for a reference point, absolutely, you should refer to that map and to find out where we're talking. But just don't get hung up on individual parcels more so than the general idea.
No, my point is that we'll go through this process and then we won't get another bite of this apple here, determining, do we agree with where you have the P's, the A's, and the C's?
That is absolutely, well, once we get all three modules, we can go back. I mean, this is not now is the best time to do that. If when you look at module 3 and say, hold on, now that I see these west side standards, I want to go back and remove a P or turn a P to a C, there will be an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Let's absolutely spend the time now. This is the best time to do it, right? I think let's
What's your thought? I don't know if I'm getting hung up on this thing or not, but
To your point, this is exactly to your point. So looking at the map, the legend doesn't even have a west side in it or a WS. And you guys just talked about the purple area, and that is I can't read it if it's a WEC or whatever on that map. So it's like it doesn't coordinate, it doesn't jihad. So it's like, well, so again, you don't know where that what staff is thinking, where is that district going to be located? And I think it's fair because a fair request, because we're just trying to make sense of, you're asking us to make decisions, but we don't know where on the map you're even thinking this should be. And I get what you're saying.
The WS is the WEC. There's still some discussion about what the name of it should be, but that is, the rest of it should jive. That is the WS district. And this map, yep, that's it.
What you're saying about not getting hung up on individual parcels and it's not the right color. I mean, I understand that, but in concept and in theory, we have to be able to look at something to say, okay, this is where you're thinking of for the new, the one you're talking about that doesn't exist at all. Where you're going to have a little grocery store at the corner in the neighborhood, or you're going to, I get that one.
That's not going to appear on here anyway.
No, and
nothing's done
that. But I think for something that's this big, and we're going to start to say what's permitted, conditional, because I can tell you right now, going to the bottom of this very first chart, this whole group living thing, I need to know more about that. Why it's, conditional, or what, is that a state statute that it has to be allowed in our residential areas?
So, yeah, the state preempts us on a lot of that stuff. If it's under 6 residents, then it's permitted by right in any residential district. If it's over 6, then it can be conditional use approval.
And over and under 6 is, what's the definition of that? Is that 6 individuals, 6 families, 6 aliens?
So in an assisted care community, you have residential assisted care communities where you'll have maybe a 5-bedroom house and you'll have a caretaker, and you can have up to 6 people that are being cared for.
No, individuals.
Correct. That is preempted by the state that says we can't do anything about it. They can move into the middle of any subdivision anywhere they want, as long as they're separated a certain distance from another one in a neighborhood. Then they're permitted by right, and that's a state statute that's been around for quite some time.
And if I may piggyback on that thought, so that's after this chart. Let's talk about the structure of ours before a little bit. So you have the chart with the allowed uses, and then you get into the classification of principal uses. So we talked about this a little bit last time. I mean, think about this as kind of like the definition of the uses. So if we do have a question about what is meant in this table, all of these use types are going to be in the next section where we get the definition. So that's very much, we're going to be doing a lot of flipping back and forth. If we're going to talk about this table, we're also going to have to refer to the next section, which is the description of the use, which is an excellent point, Kathleen. And furthermore, yeah, I actually completely agree with you that from staff's perspective, we have more of a sense already of the current zoning of the city, and referring to this map to understand what is meant. And you're absolutely right. This is the west side, and it's WEC instead of WS, but that's why we're kind of telling you that this is a draft, but we haven't, decided on what the total name of these districts are even. But yeah, this is very helpful, and I would suggest that you look at it to refer to find out what we're talking about, which is the single family, which is the medium density, which is the multifamily, mixed use, west side, downtown. Absolutely. I don't mean to ramble on, but I mean, I think it's important. We're going to set the stage for our next workshop where we're really getting into this. I think this is a really important talk to have that, make sure we're all on the same page with.
So I guess
do we want this to be thorough and to be everybody to feel like they're doing its best job. We all have that objective to get the best review possible.
So I think what I'm hearing, I guess there's a couple of ways to go about this, and I'll ask staff for their thoughts on this. We need at some point to do an exercise where we're looking at the matrix to do we agree with what's been labeled a P, what's been labeled a C, labeled an A. I guess the question is the timing of that. Should we work through section 4, have conversations on the uses, and then loop back and attack the matrix? Is there a value? Do you think we'll get a bigger picture understanding instead of trying to attack this one table at a time?
I think that's an excellent idea to do it in that order, because right now we don't, to a lot of your points, if we haven't discussed what these uses mean, then it's really hard to have a discussion about what zone they belong in. I think there's a lot of it. I think that's might be a really good way to go about it. But I'd be interested to hear what other people think.
Good with that. We just set ourselves a task list that we work our way through section 4, understand the terminology, and then we come back and work our way through the matrix specifics.
Yeah, you're referring to a matrix. You mean the table, right? We're the same terminology. This table, the principal use table.
Yes.
And so you're suggesting we go through 4.2.3, starting on page 19, the classification of principal uses, discuss those first, and then go back to the table and discuss what zone they would be allowed in.
Yeah, I'm asking that question. If if you feel like staff feels like that, we would be informed better about the intent before we start really trying to look at these uses versus, or these tables, the P's, the C's, and the A's versus the map.
No, I think that's a good idea. I think that would be a more productive discussion. I think that's fine. What do other people think?
I think that's a good idea, because then you actually understand the definition versus trying to figure out doing both at the same time.
I agree.
I think when I was going through my review, I was kind of doing that just naturally in a way, right? But I think from a group discussion standpoint, it probably makes more sense for us to be, rather than jumping back and forth. But I concur.
Okay. Yeah, particularly over Zoom.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've come to a good stopping point. So it sounds like the next time we'll work our way through section 4, get through all the definitions and uses and everything, and then before we proceed to section 10, I think we'll loop back and look at the tables. All right. Hey, on my agenda, it doesn't have an adjourn section. Does that mean we can't?
I mean, we're going all night until this is done.
I was
Might
quite
be on your own,
frantic.
Keith.
Huh?
You might be on your own.
Sorry,
Okay.
the agenda.
I couldn't find that on my agenda.
Yeah. Good point.
All right. So is there anything else before we call this meeting adjourned?
Other than the customary, thank you for your time and your ideas and your participation.
Thank you guys too.
Yeah,
right.
we're gonna continue doing this every other week, but there's gonna be a couple cases that are coming down the pike that will obviously most likely take a break from the code when those cases come, because they may take some time.
Okay. All right. Well, nothing else, we will be adjourned, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a
Good
good
night.
evening.
Enjoy your Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, yeah, too.